Hello, everybody. I hope you're keeping well during this third lockdown that we're facing here on the Isle of Man. For those not part of my student group on CO6205, my name's Dr. Ali Robertson. I'm a lecturer in computer science at University College Isle of Man. Of course, on the Isle of Man, we deliver accredited degrees from the University of Chester, and this one such module is data science. And of course, we're now at the end of the module. This is the last delivered lecture. We've gone through many different algorithms and got them working in the R environment, basically harvesting information, usually about people and about clustering people, classifying people, measuring people's activities, that kind of thing. So that we're working with human data, very much human-centered data, we now need to consider all of those aspects that we now need to protect as humans. After all, we've now been running these types of machine learning algorithms for many years. Some of the first ones were developed in the early 1950s, and they've just been developed further and further. And now we've gotten to the point where we have enough data to really get them buzzing and get them estimated well. We must consider that we have to protect people's interests as we start working them in the environment. And for a lot of businesses moving into the AI machine learning environment, we need to make them aware, and in fact you as data science professionals need to make them aware of the protections they must put in place to people. And because AI is relatively new thing, in that the sense that we haven't really had computer systems able to do it well until very recently, and in fact we're not doing it that well now, but we will in 20 years' time. We now need to consider what policies we might implement at the organizational or business level that would enable organizations to keep people safe. At the end of the day, what we don't want is too much negative comment made against the algorithms to the point where people might not allow us legally to actually use them. So it's our responsibility as users of these algorithms to make sure we do everything in an ethically decent way. So this session is all about ethics and AI, and it's the last lecture of the series, so I hope you enjoy this one because I find it fascinating, this area. By the end of this session, if you keep up with me and do some background reading on it as well, you should be able to evaluate academic and industry materials associated with ethics in AI and keep abreast of them. One thing you'll notice is how fast this moves. There's one paper I lightly review during this lecture, produced last year, and all of the references, which is their review of the literature in relation to ethics in AI, came out within the last 2 years of the publication of that paper, and their final punchline is it's a continually evolving environment due to the disruptive nature of what AI can actually be. By the end of this session, you should also be able to critically examine AI ethics via 3 terms: accountability, privacy, and fairness of applications. There's a lot more to it than that actually, but for the context of the way we're working, that should be more than adequate for now. You should also be able to identify an AI application used in industry and identify ethical risks as set against business societal benefits as well. Now this slide, I always like this. This is for the students that are on my module. You'll have seen this, or maybe remember this from the very first lecture I gave. I always give an Asimov picture. I like that. And the reason for that is Asimov really did propose robots could be built safely to support human activity. And here we see behind us a robot actually saving a human being by the looks of it. Well, I hope that's the case in any case. But we are in the very early stages of development, and this module has not touched anything on robotics at all. That's not our space, because the problems and fears that some people might have about AI taking over the world and Robocop being that thing that comes around and makes our lives less comfortable is a long way off, to be honest. We're quite a way from doing that, but we do live in the world where we are looking at human data in a great deal of detail, and actually we're pooling people together, classifying them, identifying their characteristics, and trying to predict future from that. And so as a result of that, we need to be abundantly careful about how we apply that data. So ethics is all a part of that. It's a notoriously complex area as well. The debate centres on what might occur in 20, 30 to 50 years right now. But as I say, we're more thinking of AI as the current disruptive technology, where businesses are learning how to use their pools of customer data, for example, or agencies are learning how to use their pools of data to try and establish patterns which they can use as golden nuggets for their businesses. However, AI is an ever evolving tapestry. And so we have to be always in that way of thinking that we need to be keeping up to date with the latest and greatest discussions around about the ethical situation in relation to AI. The issue we have, of course, is people give their data away for free these days in a free and easy way, and people are now accustomed to putting data on WhatsApp, putting it on Facebook, putting it on Instagram, and that then gets mined, and then those people's data are actually used, and we need to consider the awareness of people in relation to that, because if people aren't aware of it, it's not ethically sound to actually use the data in that way. People don't read the small print at the end of the day when they sign up for these services. There appears to be a consensus view, however, that we can examine ethics through a particular lens set for the time being, which is via accountability, privacy and fairness of AI apps, and I'll go through those later on in the lecture. Before beginning though, let's set some boundaries about what I will not be covering. We've just finished a data science course, maybe looking at 10 or 12 different types of algorithms and their application to measuring human activities. And as a result of that, I'm not talking about robotics here. That's something for somebody else to work out later on, and hopefully they will get it right. We're more concerned about the use of human data, might be stored in a SQL database or a NoSQL database or a Hadoop system, and how we should protect the rights of individuals in relation to that. Of course, legal backdrop in Europe and in the United Kingdom is really clear. We have the general data protection system in place now across those countries, and other countries have signed up to that on the outside as well. And those form like a base layer of what we can and can't do with data. The problem we have these days, of course, though, is that not all countries have signed up to that level of protection. And I make note here, United States, some African states and Russia don't have that level of protection within their systems. So any data stored there that might have been harvested by some semi-ethical way will actually might potentially be used in ways that our GDPR compliancy won't actually accomplish or protect against. So this provides opportunities for less scrupulous businesses to access data and mine it for information and then target the person or people in some way. I think a recent understanding of the problems we get with these types of data sources is the way that they can be moved around as well. So many of you will have heard of the concept that WhatsApp is getting its users to sign over to a new user agreement, which means essentially Facebook can connect the WhatsApp data. WhatsApp data can be connected to the Facebook data. Of course, in a machine learning world, that opens up a whole new panacea of delight, because you've got a whole bunch more of data which you can analyze and get to the real core of what people are thinking and how they're thinking. Moreover, sticking on the Facebook theme, and this is not a direct poke at Facebook, they've just done it their way, and it's like they've told us that their data we provide is their data. We've signed up to that. But now they've gone into another direction. They now own Oculus, of course. Now they have made it imperative that if you're going to buy a Quest 2 Oculus system, VR system, you also must sign up using your Facebook account, which is then linked to all the other data they already communicate with you. And of course, the big fear right now amongst people is, will they know too much about you to the extent where they know more about you than actually the individual themselves who provided that data? And that's something we need to protect against. Fundamentally, math models undertake decisions that may affect many of us for the rest of our lives, and we need to put layers of protection in just to make sure that that data is not used excessively to the point where decisions are taken in the background in relation to your life, and you can ill afford and you come across that maybe when you make applications for insurance or healthcare or something like that. And so, yes, this is thinking along that line about how organizations use data. An interesting, there's a read here that I would like you to look at. If you follow a link from the lecture slides, there's an article that published about 20 hours ago on BBC News, and it was about Facebook has just managed to produce an unsupervised learning algorithm that's mined 1 billion Instagram photo records, and with 85% accuracy, it's enabled it to predict the classifications of the photos that it's found. However, that's been chosen. So think of it a bit like a K-means clustering algorithm, unsupervised, put in all the information and just let it work out what all the themes are. But that tells you something. We have these big data systems that enable us to look at billions of photographs in a run. I bet it took a long time. But fundamentally, we now need to start thinking about, did all those people that supplied the billion photos actually know that that's how their data would be used and how they might be classified within that domain. So we are all about protection at this point, trying to think of the user and how the user might be impacted as a result of these types of activities. And the future of ethics, the future of ethics in AI systems, as you have understood from the module, data science techniques are not perfect. There is error management. That Facebook story in relation to Instagram, they were able to predict 85% of photos with a degree of accuracy, however that's actually measured. But actually, that means 15% were incorrectly classified, and if you sit on the wrong side of that and you're one of the incorrectly classified individuals, or you're grouped with the wrong group, which has a real negative consequence to you, then how do we actually protect people against that? And that's the way you need to think when you're using these types of models. And so there are many more advanced statistical techniques out there as well, usually big data focus on them. Eventually these libraries will become better and better, and they will be deployed as free tools within the R and Python library sets. As a result of that, we now need to think, how do we use these machines? How do we use these tools and mathematical algorithms? Are these tools going to be friends or foe at the end of the day? A term I always tend to use when I think of new technologies coming through and a new way of thinking that surrounds it is the disruptive force, or the disruptive technology. When we think of disruptive technologies, it's about something new comes along and it usurps an old paradigm, an old way of doing things, and throws it out the door. One might think of electronic photographs versus original film photographs, where Kodak got knocked off its pedestal because it never even thought the early photographs would be worth the salt for the professionals that use it. And so I tend to think of AI as a disruptive force because it is disruptive. It shakes everything up. It enables businesses to do things more fluidly if they manage it properly. A really interesting paper I came across a couple of weeks ago was by Dr. Thilo Hagendorf, the International Center for Ethics in the Sciences and Humanities, published only a year and a month ago, so it's pretty recent. I quote, "Current advances in research, development and application of artificial intelligence systems have yielded a far-reaching discourse on AI ethics. In consequence, a number of ethics guidelines have been released in recent years. These guidelines comprise normative principles and recommendations aimed at harnessing the disruptive potentials of AI technologies." Hagendorf, he identifies the current AI boom and suggests ethics are applied in a way to harness negative disruptive effects. What you find when you enter this world and when you review his paper there are a huge number of issues relating to AI, and they can be very domain specific. A quick Google Scholar search on the term disruptive effect of artificial intelligence systems. I now present to you the top 6 results of that on the screen behind me. So the first one, disruptive technology, economic consequences of artificial intelligence and the robotics revolution. Second paper, artificial intelligence of legal disruption, a new model for analysis. Third paper, artificial intelligence in radiation oncology, a specialty-wide disruptive transformation. Transformation, disruption, 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 disruption. And that's what a lot of people are thinking in different areas where these tools are being applied. And it's not to say there's 100% negative. A disruptive effect is not necessarily negative. It can be positive as well. And I can be absolutely certain if you're using and harnessing data properly to scan for cancers and things like that, to be able to do it more cleanly and more reliably is, of course, a really good thing to do. But it goes to highlight the very recent concerns from many different academic areas, from healthcare to smart cities, and how AI is going to impact on all of that. So why have ethical guidelines, and how do we apply those? Well, ethical guidelines provide professional developers a set of rules that can be applied to the problem of AI development. Simple as that, really. It's much more complex in its application, however. Ethical considerations may become hardwired into legal systems, Should that be desired? Actually, that's a common theme. What tends to happen is you have a code of ethic that gets applied to a domain area, and if you don't do it, the government will do it for you legally. So an organisation that can guide itself ethically is less likely to be overpowered by laws that are brought in to make sure they do their job properly and safely. See acts like the GDPR and the minimum standard to apply to AI conduct, although these can be extended once ethical requirements are desired to become law. An organizational code of conduct would be a really useful thing to develop for your team when you're building these types of models, and something that can be prepared so that dev teams know what to adhere to. If you let folk go out there with a whole host of really useful algorithmic skills to be able to harvest and mine data, they need some framework which stops them pushing things further than they should potentially. They might not even see the risk that they're putting things under. For example, I'm certain in the Facebook world and the Facebook offices, they love the concept of creating a VR system which connects onto WhatsApp and the rest of the data lake that they own, and trying to grid link that all together. But of course, you need a group of people sitting there and evaluating the ethical consideration of what that might mean. Okay, on the outset, Facebook, I'm convinced that this is their belief. Facebook are actually trying to develop a VR system which is protected, so you don't get idiots in there, basically. And so the idea is, if you've got someone VR that's logged in via their Facebook, so it's all connected, if somebody breaks a rule in VR, you can switch off all other accounts and get them to speak to you about it. So I'm convinced that's probably why they're wanting to do that. But of course, if you gave all that connectivity to a whole bunch of young junior researchers, PhDs and things like that to do your work for you and bidding, of course they'll come up with some great ideas about how to harvest it and predict what this person's going to do next. The question we have to focus on is, actually, should we actually allow that to happen, or should we put a clearly governed set of rules in place to make sure that doesn't happen negatively to the individual concerned? And as I say, if we don't walk in now and build our own codes of conduct about how this should happen, then it's likely the governments will come in and legislate, which will be problematic, because that can be a little bit overarching as well. So Heggendorf, in his 2020 paper, managed to isolate some minimum requirements that perhaps we should all aim for when we're actually building AI systems, about how we should consider those aspects that I've already covered, people's privacy, and that kind of thing. And there are other aspects that pop out from the review as well, which are very useful. And please bear in mind that all of the papers that have been reviewed have been published in the last 4 or 5 years, so it's pretty much up to date as you can get at the moment. So the 3 terms that I want to explore with you are accountability, privacy and fairness. So accountability is that process where, okay, you can run any algorithm you want in your business, but actually it's ethical to actually let people know how their data is going to be used. And certainly GDPR compliancy identifies that in your privacy statement that you must legally put onto your website, or however it is you communicate with people, it must identify really clearly how the data is used. And so some explanation about the nature of algorithms that are likely to be used, who the trading partners are that might be assisting you with it. You might be an external consultant coming in to work on their data. The people need to be aware of that, and they have the right to have explanation of the algorithmic process that actually mines their data and how that data should actually be used. Even if it conflicts with your inner desire as an organization to not publish that data, you should publish that data. Fundamentally, as the second statement, privacy identifies, people should have a right to privacy for their data. So as Germany pointed out to Facebook when it banned the sale of Quest 2 Oculus systems just before Christmas in Germany, was that it's absolutely excessive to collect data and connect your Oculus data to your Facebook data. And so as a result of that, they're no longer allowed to sell Quest 2 in Germany. And that's kind of the level that maybe we should be thinking about as well. And people have a right not to have their data examined algorithmically, and that certainly would have been mined in some direction or other. And so this privacy is, you have to have a get out clause to say, I don't want my data mined. Actually, that's not what I want. Even if it damages the ability, say for a movie service, to actually present the right movies to that individual. If they don't want to have that done, they don't want to be compared collaboratively to other users, then that should be their right. I think out of all of these 3 terms, we now have to come across fairness, because this is where we have to think about algorithms frequently get it wrong. I think one of the key learnings that you will have come across, I hope this is the learning at least, is that algorithms, they're not great. Anyone walking into an AI type module, whether it's machine learning, data science, or connecting up web pages with these types of models, will sometimes walk in with the rose-tinted spectacles that AI is the dream and the panacea, and it really isn't, as you now know. Very often, particularly if your data is biased in particular ways, you don't get particularly good models. You only get models that maybe put you a step further ahead. They don't actually entirely model the entire world and predict it accurately. And so we need to consider that in our models. If we have biased data, we're going to get biased models. And what we mean by that in the worst possible outcome is if you're mining somebody's data and somebody gets put into maybe a negative group outcome, whatever that might be, and when maybe they shouldn't be in that because there's an error of some description, that's not fair. You might be picking on that person unwittingly, which is a bias against them, whether it's because of the color of their skin. Apparently in these algorithms, they tend to pick that up as maybe having more negative impacts. You must not allow that to happen. It must be built into your ethos, your code of conduct, that you examine things for unfairness. I'm looking forward to seeing formal results of the Facebook evaluation of 1 billion photographs from Instagram, because of the 15% that are wrong, just how badly are they wrong, and what are the negative consequences to those individuals within those groups. At the end of the day, it's not a great model. It's only 85% accurate, which might seem on the face of it really good, but actually that still means it's got a lot of work to do. So we have to protect individuals at all costs. We cannot just roll out these models with a degree of comfort, knowing that somebody might be negatively influenced. In addition to these three comments, and I couldn't go through this lecture without thinking about the early work of the the science fiction philosophers of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Of course, Asimov in the Robot series actually quite clearly defined three laws that would have to be applied into the mindset of any robotic or AI type system that you might be produced. The first law: a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Second, a robot must obey the orders given by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. So you can almost think of an AI system here where you've got a biased system being produced here, and you have to enable it. So if the system itself can detect it's done something wrong, it should shut down and not do anything, really, according to Asimov's rules, particularly as it's likely that a human being may be negatively influenced by whatever that activity actually is. And the third law, if I remember rightly, it's kind of a catch-all, which is a robot must obey the orders given by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law, which of course is about direct or inappropriate inaction against a human being. Now, those rules are pretty good, but we've now got a deeper philosophy. We're now facing AI in the face, and in the next 30 to 40 years, we're going to see some outstanding outcomes from it. And what we see now are the current day scientific philosophers are sitting around and thinking what is the next step. And there's a very good article, and I've put it on my last slide, which I'll leave up for a few seconds at the end, from the Scientific American, identifying why the three laws here just aren't strong enough in the current setting that we now face. And that's not a poke at Asimov there. He did an awesome job in producing those three laws in the first place, in the absence of any real AI actually being present. So hardly surprising when you actually start facing AI and know the data that's being used to estimate it, then suddenly you recognize actually there's a whole host of problems that might arise. Now, in the slide behind, I believe it was published by the Oxford Internet Institute in the United Kingdom, and what it's useful for is it goes to show the level of commitment we can put to try and use information systems, AI-based information systems, to try and sort problems out for us. And of course, we live in a world where we have terrorist threats and things like that. The focus here, if you look at the image there, is actually a photograph of an airport with people milling around. And what the system's doing is automatically scanning people's faces and identifying who they are. And it gives you a little bit of detail. So obviously it's pulling the image in and it's doing a comparison against other different people it stores in its database. And it's saying this person is 45 years of age, plus or minus 3 years. Gender is likely to be male. Threat, 0, happy. Yeah. then the other end of the scale, we've got a person to the very right of the screen that's got a square mark around their face. And so there's an individual there, age 43 years old, plus or minus something, I can't read it on my screen. Threat, very strong threat, not happy. Yeah. So the algorithms found something about that individual. And I don't like that kind of thing, because none of those people there have probably given their permission to actually have their imaging taken on and brought into a databasing type structure and compared against other things. Now, that's an ethical problem, to be honest, because there was a case, I think it was a year and a half ago, thereabouts, in the United Kingdom. They field tested a criminal detection system in East London. Or was it South London? It doesn't really matter, I suppose. And what it was to do, it was clever, it was intelligent. So it was a camera, it stuck it out the side of a police van, and it scanned everybody's faces as they walked around the street and looked for criminals. Which on the face of it is like, yeah, good use of AI. And it probably is, to be honest. Only the error rate was quite high. So what the police were ending up doing were arresting innocent people, or stopping innocent people and questioning them on the street as to what their purpose was, who they were, so they could then verify manually as a human being to make sure they were or were not a criminal. And of course, there's an ethical problem to the stop and search type culture in the United Kingdom, which meant that as soon as the error rate was detected to be quite high, they pulled the project. And I imagine these airport type systems, which I can see why they've got them, they all make fundamental use case sense. We have to be careful how we employ these systems to make sure people are not adversely affected by biased systems, and that people going into such environments are aware acutely where their data is stored, how it's stored, and how it's used. We must not fall away from that. As I had a meeting with government officials recently, and it was quite interesting how some government officials would love to see everything brought together and grid linked together. And of course, that's where we fall into the trap of trying to know too much about individuals than is really fair. And again, this airport system here falls into that trap of trying to get us to think about yes, a great overall use case, but let's step back and think, actually, what is the implication on all of the people in that airport that are being evaluated by that system? And in fact, you're evaluating everybody's faces. Do you store that data for the long term, or is it just something you bring in and just compare and then delete? You know, all of these things have to go into the design of a fundamental AI project every single time. And of course, we all know about Google AI and ethics. 2 years ago, when I began designing the data science elements for the degree courses here, AI ethics was really well thought of, and it still is. They still have some very good ideas and thoughts about the ethics in relation to AI. But of course, since then, they've been rather caught on the hop because they've now started to get into the conflict. Of course, when I'm telling you you can't store data, when I'm telling you you can't use an AI algorithm for a given purpose, then of course that flies in the face of profitability. So that naturally comes into conflict with organizations like Alphabet because they're there to make money for their shareholders. And I get that bit too, it's fine. But they have recently fallen into dispute with the global AI community because they are now seem to be getting rid of, politely, of people that are very good in this area of the application of ethics into AI systems. And like I keep saying, the AI systems we've got today are really weak, in fairness. They're not great. They'll get better, yeah, in 20 years' time. They'll be really, really good, probably. But at the moment, we need even organizations like Google to be really solid on the nature of ethics. When you read their actual principles, if it'll open up suitably for me, when you read AI principles and look at their principles in a bit of detail, you soon see straight away, actually, it all makes sense. It's a nice, straightforward application of ethics. And let's just get those up now. Artificial intelligence at Google and in principle. And so let's have a look at the main headings at least. This is all nice stuff, right? So this doesn't fly in the face of anything I've shown you before about the earlier paper. But let's just think about what this actually means. So be socially beneficial. Well, what we mean by that, when you're being socially beneficial, it's having a good, positive impact on society generally. That's what we would normally do. in a business that might be somewhat conflict ridden because you're not necessarily being socially beneficial by encouraging people to behave in a certain way by advertising certain things, but organizations, if they're honest with the people where they're gathering the data from to estimate the models, then maybe that is fair. Avoid creating or reinforcing unfair bias. That's back to that story about making sure your data's good, making sure that your models, even if you believe they're producing accurate models, don't actually necessarily target smaller groups of people negatively, when actually that would have a detrimental effect to them for the rest of their lives, or even for just a short period in their lives. Be accountable to people. Explain how you do things. Yeah, incorporate privacy design principles. So if you've got a privacy statement on your website, that's what you use, and you make sure every one of your customers has the opportunity to read that in an easy read format. There's a GDPR principle for you. Uphold high standards of scientific excellence. So what they mean by that is always use advanced techniques which create the least biased models, and be made available for use that accord with these principles. Be made available for uses that accord to these principles. So if you're going to produce an open source library and move it out there, make recommendations about how it would be applied and the right sort of data environment where that be applied. I suppose that's kind of one area they would look at. And so, yeah, do go over those principles. They are useful. I know Google's had a bit of a kicking recently in relation to its staffing of its AI ethics team, but actually those principles should still hold. And along with those, from the likes of Hagendorf here, the accountability, privacy and fairness, you should have a pretty holistic overview of the general situation. Now, normally I would run a workshop at this stage of the lecture. Obviously, I'm not going to do that on my own. That'd be really boring. But I think I would like you to get to at least look at these two aspects on the right. This is the problem space, really, which is we have two use cases for an AI system. The top one is the traditional one. It's one they've been using for years, which is, okay, let's try and segment our customers into good customers, i.e. the profitable ones, against those that are less profitable. And that's all well and good, and we hope we can do that and do that successfully. At the end of the day, though, it depends how you apply that situation. If one of your good customers falls into the negative camp, the weaker customers, but that's actually not correct, you're losing money. You don't want to be doing that. But fundamentally, we also need to make sure there are no negative consequences to those put in the negative camp that would later on have a negative impact against them. An example would be segmenting insurance customers, where we can segment customers into those which are low risk, mid risks, high risks, that kind of thing, and we can use AI to do that for us. But of course, if we then start rejecting somebody for insurance as a result of an improperly allocated algorithm, then actually they've probably got a case against you that's not really fair to do that. So again, that would be case number one: segmentation, getting it right, getting it wrong. At the bottom here, we have a system which is an automatic shoplifting detection system. On the right-hand side, this person's face has been evaluated. They're wearing a hoodie, and it's detected a suspicious rate, 86% likelihood that they are shoplifting. And so, of course, we would then send security down to get them. But of course, that means there's a 14% chance they're not shoplifting. So we need to train staff, if they're using one of these systems, to handle these situations carefully and read properly. If you're handing this information to security personnel, they need to know the risk of getting it wrong and how to manage the situation before they actually do make a suggestion that somebody has actually been shoplifting. These are alert systems, not real systems. These are alert systems, not actual proving systems, as I would describe them. That note should be of interest to all students, full stop, is we use, when you submit an assignment to our world, Turnitin, which evaluates the similarity of submitted papers against all other student bits of work, plus all of the other information in the world. It really does do that very well too. So when I mark a student's script and it's been uploaded through Turnitin, I know what percentage of that appears to come from other sources which is not directly that of the student's work. That's a very useful tool, but it's only that. If I get a similarity index of 40, that would indicate that 40% of the words are similar or same to other bits of things out there in the World Wide Web. But actually, you have to look at that as an individual to make sure that the system is not giving a biased results, because that can happen for a whole bunch of reasons. maybe a student cut and paste in a whole swathe of the text of question that you've asked them. That will show as my work, not their work. Or bibliographies, if they're very large. Of course, if you write a bibliography and you ask everyone to do it in APA format, then if everyone does it correctly in APA format, and they're likely to because they use Word to do it, and does it the same way, they will be in exactly the same format and will look like copying, but actually an algorithm would pick it up as copying, but actually it's not copying. So let's be careful about how we use AI systems. The ethical case is really, really strong. We must have strong ethics in place. Even if the organizations you work for don't have that, you need to think in the back of your mind, what do they need to know to make sure that we don't do something that will be detrimental to the customers, the staff, and whoever else we're using within that algorithmic framework. That completes the lecture for today. I hope you enjoyed that. I've thoroughly enjoyed researching this. It's the first time I've lectured in the ethics of AI, so I've been quite pleased to get my head into it at last. But as I say, just be careful out there. These tools are in development. Yeah, they're not finished tools, and I think you know that now, having completed this module. Congratulations for completing the module as well. Goodbye.